won't go. Okay, so Genesis 24, starting in verse 1. Now Abraham was old, advanced in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in every way. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he owned, please place your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I live, but you shall go to my country and to my relatives and take a wife for my son Isaac. And the servant said to him, suppose the woman would not be willing to follow me to this land. Should I take your son back to the land from where you came? Then Abraham said, beware, lest you take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my birth, and who spoke to me and who swore to me, saying to your descendants, I will give this land, he will send his angel before you, and you will take a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from my oath. Only do not take my son back there. So the servant placed his hand under the thigh of Abraham his master, and swore to him concerning this matter. Then the servant took 10 camels from the camels of his master, and set out with a variety of good things of his master's in his hand. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. And he made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water at evening time, the time when the women go out to draw water. And he said, O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today, and show loving kindness to my master Abraham. Behold, I am standing by the spring, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Now may it be that the girl to whom I say, please let down your jar so that I may drink, and who answers, drink, and I will water your camels also, may she be the one whom thou hast appointed for thy servant Isaac. And by this I shall know that thou hast shown loving kindness to my master. And it came about, before he had finished speaking, that behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, came out with her jar on her shoulder. And the girl was very beautiful, a virgin, and no man had had relations with her. And she went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. Then the servant ran to meet her and said, please let me drink a little water from your jar. And she said, drink, my lord. And she quickly lowered her jar to her hand and gave him a drink. Now when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will draw also for your camels until they have finished drinking. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran back to the well to draw, and she drew for all his camels. Meanwhile, the man was gazing at her in silence to know whether the Lord had made his journey successful or not. Then it came about, when the camels had finished drinking, that the man took a gold ring, weighing 1/2 shekel, and 2 bracelets for her wrist, weighing 10 shekels in gold, and said, whose daughter are you? Please tell me, is there room for us to lodge in your father's house? And she said to him, I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. Again she said to him, we have plenty of both straw and feed, and room to lodge in. Then the man bowed low, and he worshipped the Lord. And he said, blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his loving kindness and his truth toward my master. As for me, the Lord has guided me in the way to the house of my master's brother. Then the girl ran and told her mother's household about these things. Now Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban. And Laban ran outside to the man at the spring. And it came about that when he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's wrist, and when he heard the words of Rebekah his sister saying, this is what the man said to me, he went to the man, and behold, he was standing by the camels at the spring. And he said, "Come in, blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside, since I prepared the house and a place for the camels?" So the man entered the house. Then Laban unloaded the camels, and he gave straw and feed to the camels, and water to wash his feet, and the feet of the men who were with him. But when food was set before him to eat, he said, "I will not eat until I have told my business." And he said, "Speak on." So he said, "I am Abraham's servant, and the Lord has greatly blessed my master, so that he has become rich, and he has given him flocks and herds and silver and gold and servants and maids and camels and donkeys. Now Sarah, my master's wife, bore a son to my master in her old age, and he has given him all that he has. And my master made me swear, saying, You shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, in whose land I live. But you shall go to my father's house and to my relatives, and take a wife for my son." And I said to my master, "Suppose the woman does not follow me?" And he said to me, "The Lord, before whom I have walked, will send his angel with you to make your journey successful, and you will take a wife for my son from my relatives and from my father's house. Then you will be free from my oath when you come to my relatives, and if they do not give her to you, you will be free from my oath." So I came today to the spring and said, "O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, if now thou wilt make my journey on which I go successful, behold, I am standing by the spring, and may it be that the maiden who comes out to draw, and to whom I say, Please let me drink a little water from your jar, and she will say to me, You drink, and I will draw for your camels also. Let her be the woman whom the Lord has appointed for my master's son." Before I had finished speaking in my heart, behold, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder, and went down to the spring and drew. And I said to her, Please let me drink. And she quickly lowered her jar from her shoulder and said, Drink, and I will water your camels also. So I drank, and she watered the camels also. Then I asked her and said, Whose daughter are you? And she said, The daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Milcah bore to him. And I put the ring on her nose and the bracelets on her wrist. And I bowed low and worshipped the Lord and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had guided me in the right way to take the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son. So now, if you are going to deal kindly and truly with my master, tell me, and if not, let me know, that I may return to the right hand or to the left. Then Laban and Bethuel answered and said, The matter comes from the Lord, so we cannot speak to you good or bad, or bad or good. Behold, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go, and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has spoken. And it came about, when Abraham's servant heard the words, that he bowed himself to the ground before the Lord. And the servant brought out articles of silver and articles of gold and garments, and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave precious things to her brother and to her mother. Then he and the men who were with him ate and drank and spent the night. When they arose in the morning, he said, Send me away to my master. But her brother and her mother said, Let the girl stay with us a few days, say 10. Afterwards she may go. And he said to them, Do not delay me, since the Lord has prospered my way. Send me away that I may go to my master. And they said, We will call the girl and consult her wishes. Then they called Rebekah and said to her, Will you go with this man? And she said, I will go. Thus they sent away their sister Rebekah and her nurse with Abraham's servants and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, May you, our sister, become thousands of 10,000s, and may your descendants possess the gate of those who hate them. Then Rebekah arose with her maids, and they mounted the camels and followed the man. So the servant took Rebekah and departed. Now Isaac had come from going to Beer Lahai Roi, for he was living in the Negev. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, camels were coming. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel, and she said to the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field to meet us?" And the servant said, "He is my master." Then she took her veil and covered herself. And the servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. Then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. Thus Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Okay. Great story, though. Great story. Okay, well, before we go back, I want you to look in Genesis 25. I think it's 25:20. And we'll get a time frame for this. Yeah, Genesis 25:20. It says, "And Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel." So he was 40 years old when he married. And if you'll remember last week when Sarah died, he was 37. And so 3 years have passed since the last chapter. And so that gives you a time frame. He's about 40 when this takes place. So with that in mind, let's look at 24:1. Now Abraham was old, advanced in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in every way. And I think it's interesting how he says it two ways. Abraham was old, advanced in years, or advanced in age. And so when I was looking this up, of course, when he was old is a rough. I mean, at this point, if Isaac is 40, he's 140. Yes, I know. And remember what's on his mind. I mean, it's been promised that through Isaac that his promise will be reckoned, or his seed will be reckoned. So Abraham knows that Isaac's going to have descendants. He knows that they're... Okay, so everyone's aging, and it would have been the role of the parent. I guess the parent... I don't know. This was a great idea. I don't know when it changed. But parents had a huge role in finding a spouse for their son. It's a great idea.
It is.
And so, yes.
I do. My kids are anything like my husband, they will be locked in their rooms. But I'm very happy my parents did not choose a spouse for me, because if they had, I would still be in Idaho unhappy. So.
Okay, yes, you're right. Well, in this case, so in this culture, it would have been part of Abraham's role to find a spouse for Isaac, and knowing that he's going to have descendants and these things. So the first mention that he was old, it's to indicate possibly that this was weighing on his mind. It's time that, it's just time to start thinking about marriage and offspring before, life expectancies were long, but not that long.
In the scheme of things, though, someone choosing their own spouse is fairly new when you look back at history.
It is. Okay, and then he says advanced in years. And so they think that this probably meant he was starting to feel the effects of aging. So, just things happen as we get older. These bodies were never meant to last forever. They're just temporary. It's just a constant reminder we're just passing through this life, and we have something much greater for which we look forward. So he's old and advanced in age, and the Lord has blessed Abraham in every way. And he has truly blessed Abraham in every way at this point. Okay. So then, verse 2, and Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household. I love how there's no name mentioned here, because the whole focus of this chapter, we don't want it to be on the servant. It's about the Lord who's leading this servant. And I think the fact that Abraham, who's such a man of integrity, and we saw last week, he's just a man of integrity. And so for him to put so much trust and confidence in this servant, which would have been customary. I mean, you would have a servant, he would take care of what was in your household, and it was a huge trust relationship. But it speaks so much of this servant, a man of Abraham's standing, to put so much confidence in this servant. And, we'll see, as we've just read and as we look at it in more detail, you can see why.
But we probably know who it was.
Well, it's so funny you say that. Everything I read said Eliezer. Okay, so then even when I was going over the lesson last night in my head, I kept saying Eliezer, but it doesn't say Eliezer. It could have been, we don't know, it doesn't say. But I think he left it out so that the focus is on who is leading the servant. And so,
Or it was assumed that we would know because that was an issue before Sarah became pregnant.
Right.
Before there were any children born, his things would have been left to Eliezer.
Yes, Eliezer would have been the heir. Yes, before Isaac. So, yes, absolutely. Okay. So we have the servant. It's the oldest of his household. So that's the same word, I think, that would translate elder, the eldest or the elder. So a respectable, wise, older man, had been there a long time, in charge of all that he owned. And we know Abraham owned a lot. So he was in charge of all that he owned. So just a trusted servant. And then he says, please place your hand under my thigh. Well, this word thigh is it's also translated loins. And so I want us to look at Exodus 1:5 and kind of see this word in context. And this wasn't the only place, but this is just a really good example. So Exodus 1:5 reads, get there. Exodus 1:5. And all the persons who come from the loins of Jacob were 70 in number, but Joseph was already in Egypt. And so when they left the Canaan, I guess, and went to Egypt because of the famine and the whole Joseph story. So when they went in, but here it's describing that all the persons who came from the loins of Jacob, and it's the exact same word that's translated thigh over there. So the loins, that is just understood to have to do with procreation, with childbearing.
Well, I thought perhaps Abraham was old and bedfast and he needed to be moved.
That is, I had not thought about that. But this is later translated loins and it has to do with reproduction. And so that gives the idea that possibly all of this is coming from Abraham's sense that Isaac is going to have heirs. It's time to start thinking about a spouse. And so we have been putting it under there. So I just thought that was interesting. Yeah, very, very interesting. So anyway, it gives the idea of childbearing.
There's an interesting
Yes.
note in this
Oh,
one.
good. Yes.
It says the servant put his hand under the thigh of Abraham. So since striking one's thigh was possibly understood as a sign of remorse and submission, the placing of one's hand under the thigh of another may have indicated submission to that person's strength and authority. In any case, by undertaking this action, the servant binds himself to obey Abraham's request.
Yes. Yes. Okay, so at this point, Abraham is still saying, place your hand under my thigh. So no oath has been entered yet. He's just saying, this is what I want you to do. And then in verse 3 he says, I will make you swear by the Lord. And we covered this when we talked about James. When we were studying James, God never says don't swear an oath, but we cannot overemphasize the significance, the seriousness of entering an oath. If you enter an oath in the name of the Lord and don't keep it, there are very serious consequences. Like, you don't want to do that. And so here he's going to make him swear by the Lord. So this is very serious. And as you read the text with that in mind, you understand that they understand the seriousness. And this servant, whoever he is, he knows the seriousness of entering this oath. So he's going to have questions before he actually puts his hand under the thigh and makes this oath. He's going to have some questions because this is very serious. And they know how binding it is. Okay, so he says, I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, so that you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites. And and among whom I live. So we know he was living among the Canaanites, and the passage that just came to mind in thinking about this is in Deuteronomy 7. We know Rahab showed up in the genealogy of Christ, and she was a Canaanite. So it's twofold, kind of. So Deuteronomy 7, starting in verse 3. Furthermore, you shall not intermarry with them. You shall not give your daughters to their sons, nor shall you take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will quickly destroy you. So this is about not marrying someone who worships other gods. That's to a certain point, preserving the purity of the Jewish genealogy, of course. But we know that there are some non-Jews even in Christ's genealogy. So the real point is just not to marry someone of another faith who's going to turn you away from God. So that was, of course, going to be very important when you see the big picture of what Isaac is doing. Okay, so and he's like, I'm making you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I live. And it was just very, and when we were in the Ten Commandments and we were talking about the jealousy of the Lord, and I loved this definition that I found, and it was God's jealousy is his zeal to come against anything that would hinder our holiness. So he's very passionate to keep us holy and single-minded and focused on him, and just not a divided heart, but a single-minded, fully devoted to him. As we read last week about Caleb, he followed the Lord fully. He's fully devoted. And so that's what he wants, a full devotion. And a wife of a different faith or different worships other gods would be a threat to that. Okay. And then verse 4. But you shall go to my country and to my relatives and take a wife from my son Isaac. And we see later, my initial thought was Ur of the Chaldees. But we're going to see later they actually had gone Haran, and we'll see they're in Haran, which in modern day today, it's just north of Syria, just inside Turkey, just right inside Turkey, on the southern border of Turkey. So that's where his family ended up settling. So that's where he's going. You shall go to my country and to my relatives and take a wife from my son Isaac. In verse 5, and the servant said to him, so before he enters this oath, he's got some questions. He says, suppose the woman will not be following. Suppose the woman will not be willing to follow me to this land. Oh, it's so nice to meet you. Hopefully we'll see you next week.
I'll be vacationing.
Oh.
So I'll be back though.
Okay, bye. Okay, so verse 5. And the servant said to him, suppose the woman will not be willing to follow me to this land. Should I take your son back to the land from where you came? And then Abraham said to him, beware lest you take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my birth, and who spoke to me and who swore to me, saying, to your descendants I will give this land, he will send his angel before you, and you will take a wife for my son from there. So in other words, he took him out of that. He doesn't want him going back. They're out of that. And so, and then he says that he's going to
But
send...
don't you appreciate the fact that he asked a question?
Yes.
The servant did. I mean, he was concerned enough about following directions to the T that he wanted to be
Exactly. I did appreciate that so much, and that indicates that he understood the seriousness of this oath.
Yes.
We've got to cover all. Right, they didn't have cell phones. Hey, Abraham. She won't come back, what do you want me to do? I mean, that was not an
Here's a
option.
picture of her. Here's what she looks like.
So that was not an option then. So you're right, he took this so seriously, and he was thinking through and wanted to be so clear on what his instructions were and what this oath would mean and what Abraham wanted him to do. And so he does. He asks the question, and then Abraham is very adamant, do not. I've been taken out of that. Don't send my son back. And then he says, he will send his angel before you, and you will take a wife for my son from there. And so, I'm just very confident that this is going to go well. I mean, he knows that the Lord has promised offspring. He knows this is where. So, very confident in that. And then verse 8, but if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from this, my oath. Only do not take my son back there. So if she's not willing to come, he's free. So that had to have been a huge relief to him. So at that point, the servant placed his hand under the thigh. And Desiree was right in that a sign of submission. He enters this oath now under the thigh of Abraham his master, and swore to him concerning this matter. I found it interesting too that this would have been, I mean, they would have had a relationship, obviously, for Abraham to trust him so much, but they never lost, it was never a friend in this for a friend. They never lost sight of the master-servant relationship. They never lost that perspective throughout this whole passage. He always saw himself as a servant to Abraham. And not his buddy.
And Abraham's relationship.
Yes, exactly. And they just had such a clear understanding of master and servant versus buddy. They never lost sight of that. So I really appreciated that throughout this text also. Okay, so he takes the oath. And then verse 10, then the servant took 10 camels from the camels of his master, and set out with a variety of good things of his master in his hand. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. So, which we'll see is Haran. But Nahor is his brother. So Abraham had a brother named Nahor. And we'll go through the whole genealogy in a minute. But so he's sending back to the land of his brother. And he made okay, so we skipped the whole long trip. So I don't know how long the journey took. I just don't know. There's no detail. It's so interesting that we get little details like she took the jar off her shoulder and brought it down to her hand. We get details on that. And then not a mention of the journey. You just, one verse he's packing up camels, the next verse he's there. So I just find that so intriguing.
About how far do you think it was?
I meant to look it up. Okay, what does yours say?
So, to where Rebecca lived was approximately 550 miles.
550.
So it said a journey like that would have taken Abraham's servant 21 days. So it's a man traveling alone. So had they been with, all the family and everything. But so approximately 21 days, 550 miles.
So that Lawton to St. Louis is 600 miles.
He would average 25 miles a day or so.
That's an amazing amount of miles.
That's a walking, isn't it?
That's
they're
cooking
riding
it.
those camels.
I don't know. I'm not sure they can do that. Or not.
Ride them.
You can
Ride those camels.
They might go faster than.
Oh, they are pretty fast from what I understand, and then they can pack some of them.
I just know how long it took my grandfather to go by horse from Lawton to Duncan. Took a day.
Oh, wow. Wow.
I think those
30
camels are
miles.
pretty fast.
Well, that explains why he didn't write anything. How can you write from the back of a camel?
He may have, we just been reading.
It's so funny.
But even if it took them longer than 21 days, we're still looking around a month, not like years or anything.
Right, a month. Okay,
Plenty
good.
of time to
That's
pray
a good.
about it.
Thank you. Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you. Yes, so verse 11, we get there. He made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water at evening time, the time when women go out to draw water. So, he goes to the city where his brother lives, goes to where the women are. If you're looking for a single woman, he just went to the right spot, and it would have been their job in the evenings getting ready for, I guess, dinner, they would go, and usually the young women would go and get water for the families. So they'd draw the water, and they're at the spring or the well. And I guess it was very common to have the camels kneel, that they would sit to rest.
Mounting or dismounting.
And resting. So, yeah. Okay, then verse 12. And he said, "O Lord," I love this. Just in the middle of everything, he prays. And I treasure when we see the prayers that they prayed. And it's just, okay, so here's his prayer. And he said, "O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show loving kindness to my master. Behold, I am standing by the spring, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. And now may it be that the girl to whom I say, 'Please let down your jar so that I may drink,' and who answers, 'Drink, and I will water your camels also,' may she be the one whom thou hast appointed for thy servant Isaac. And by this I shall know that thou hast shown loving kindness to my master." So I just love that prayer. It's just simple, direct. I mean, I just love the purity and the sincerity of this prayer. And when he refers to him back in verse 12 as the God of my master Abraham, the assumption is that it's because Abraham introduced him to the Lord. And so that would be how he knew the Lord. And obviously from his prayer he knows him well and has seen all that he's done in Abraham's life. So that kind of bothered me, but whenever I read, that's what they think, that because Abraham introduced him would be why he referred to him.
And don't you think this man was probably born in Abraham's household?
It's just so hard to know.
And was probably has been with him
His
forever.
whole life. It's very well could
He
have
was
been.
witness to, I mean, he may not have been eyewitness to stuff, but he was witness to what happened and the miracles that happened. And he, he was bound to know
Yes.
that God.
Yes. And just
is with Abraham.
his prayer here, I mean, on one hand, it speaks so highly of Abraham to have a servant who's just so humble and sincere, and then also speaks so highly of the servant that Abraham put so much trust in him.
Well, and his humility shows, like, he
Yes.
doesn't show me success. Show
I
success
know.
to my master, Abraham. Show
Totally-
kindness to Abraham. Even
totally
though he's doing the
selfless.
job.
But I
show
think
success
that's
to
also the
Abraham.
culture they lived in, too.
I know, it's
Where
so
you were born
selfless.
into servanthood, and you took that, that's what you were. You didn't think about aspiring to be something else. You were a servant when you were born.
Yeah. I did. I thought that was so selfless.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't, so Abraham will still like me, let me have success here, so I'll look good. It was none, like, yes, I mean, that was like so far from his thoughts or his prayer, just so far removed from him. And everything is about blessing Abraham. And then when he says, "Behold, I'm standing by the spring," I don't know what possessed me to look that up, but it was just interesting that I can't find it in here, but he was saying, I am standing, or I have taken my stand, or I've positioned myself. It's not like informing God where I am in case He's not seeing me. It's nothing like that. He's just saying, I positioned myself here by the springs, because that's where the women were, the single women were. So he says, "Behold, I've taken my position here by the spring, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water." Well, he knew Nahor lived there, and so it would have been a good place to go look for Nahor's daughter. And then he says, "Now may it be that the girl to whom I say, 'Please let down your jar so I may drink,' and who answers, 'Drink, and I will water your camels also.'" And at this part, "May she be the one whom thou hast appointed." So it's such a clear understanding that God He's set this girl apart for being a descendant of Christ, the wife of Isaac. He set her apart. He already knows. He's done all the arranging. It's just the servant's role to go escort her back, because God's done all of the arranging here. Whom thou hast appointed. It's not a random anything. And he's just asking that please let, not, I'm going to go pick the prettiest girl and please let her be the one. It's more like, you've already picked her, please just let me be drawn to that one and let that be the one to whom I speak. So please, so anyway, whatever. Verse 14, now may it be that the girl to whom I say, please let down your jar so that I may drink, and who answers, drink, and I will water your camels also. May she be the one whom thou hast appointed for thy servant Isaac. And by this I shall know that thou hast shown loving kindness again to my master. I mean, nothing about this. He has not made himself the centerpiece of the story in any way. And I just appreciate that.
And I think on the part of Rebecca, the fact that she watered his camels, the camel can drink 30 gallons of water,
We're going to talk about that. Yes.
showed that she could work. And she was not too good to do it.
Exactly. We're going to see. I mean, just a hard working.
Can you imagine?
Well,
I would take hours.
Okay. So, and I love this. So, verse 15. And it came about before he had finished speaking. So, he's still in prayer about this. And before he's even finished, that behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, came out with her jar on her shoulder. And I thought this was interesting, too, because it was true to their culture to put them on the shoulder, where in Egypt they carry them on their heads. And so different cultures would carry them differently. And so hers is on her shoulder. Just an interesting detail that I point out here. Okay, so let's talk about this family tree. Let's go to Genesis chapter 11. Starting in verse 27. It says, now these are the records of the generations of Terah. Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And Haran became the father of Lot. So I try to put that on. You'll have to draw your own lines because I didn't know how to get the computer to do that. But so Haran became the father of Lot. And Haran died in the presence of his father Terah in the land of his birth, or of the Chaldeans. So Haran died in Chaldea. And then verse 29, and Abraham and Nahor took wives for themselves. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai. The name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and Iscah. And so in 29, we see that Haran was the father of Lot, Ms. Milcah, the daughter of Haran. So Haran had Lot, Milcah, and Iscah. He had those three children. And then, so Nahor marries Milcah. So Nahor married his niece. That was his niece. And we also know that Sarai was also a daughter of Terah. Just she had a different mother than Abraham, but they had the same dad. And that's in Genesis chapter, I can't remember if it was 20, 21. I should have
Say that again.
Sarah was also the daughter of Terah. And I'll find it in the scripture.
But we see that when he's explaining that she really is his sister.
Yes, it's in Genesis 20, chapter 12. It says, besides, she actually is my sister, the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother. And she became my wife. So, they were half. So it was only half lie, or half truth. If you look at it. Okay, so, anyway. And then Abraham and Sarah, of course, have Isaac. And then let's turn over to, let me finish reading this. And Sarah was barren and had no children, verse 31. And Terah took Abram, his son, and Lot, the son of Haran. So Haran has died. So obviously Lot went with Terah because he had no dad. His grandson, and Sarai, his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife. And they went together from Ur of the Chaldeans in order to enter the land of Canaan, and they went as far as Haran and settled there. And so they settled in that region. It's on the, thank you, Karen. It's at the top there. It's just north of, 500 miles north of Mamre in the land of Canaan. And so that's where they ended up settling. And I guess they named it after Haran, their son who had died. Okay, and they settled there.
I have a thought.
Yes.
It could be way off.
Okay.
But when you were just reading that, and they identified who Sarah was,
Mm-hmm.
she was identified through her husband
Yes.
as
Always.
the daughter-in-law, not as his daughter.
I know.
So her position falls directly under her husband.
Good. That's a very good observation. Okay, let's get more of this tree. And it's the end of 22. So 22. So Genesis chapter 22, verse 20. And so I only put that Nahor had Bethuel, but you're going to see he actually had 12 sons, 8 by one wife and 4 by a concubine. So now it came about after these things that it was told Abraham, saying, Behold, Milcah has borne children to your brother Nahor. So Milcah and Nahor are married, and they have Uz is his firstborn, and Buz his brother, and Kemuel. And this is kind of important. I should have put this one in there too. But they also have a son named Kemuel, and then he has a son named Aram. And that'll be important next week. And then he goes on and lists all the other sons. And the end of 22 says, and Bethuel. And then 23, and Bethuel became the father of Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother, and his concubine, whose name was Reumah, also bore 4 more children. I won't even pretend to.
I'm all messed up now.
Oh, you are? Why?
Well, I've got lines going everywhere.
Yeah, that's why I just left it with one son, and
Yeah, I messed
And
up
then-
after about the second line. It's okay, I'll retrace it.
Bethuel had, well, we probably have an extra sheet. So you can, anyway, so that's how that works. So, I guess Rebecca would have been Isaac's first cousin once removed. Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of them say second cousin, but technically it's first cousin once removed. Okay. So back to our text in Genesis 24. And this is we'll say it again too, but just the way that it's written, the servant still has no idea who she is. The author just puts that in because they're writing after the fact and we know now. But at this point, he's not even finished praying and here comes Rebecca.
I do have a question for you.
Yeah, please.
Okay, so obviously going back to his family is to just keep the bloodline pure, because at this point that family's not a God-fearing family, are they?
That's what was so interesting because Cleta had mentioned it last week too. Originally, Terah worshipped idols.
Right.
At some point, they left Ur the Chaldeans. Obviously, God called Abraham and set him apart and wanted him to leave that family for a reason. But yet, when we read this text, they know exactly who he's talking about.
Right.
It wasn't. So I don't know if at some point, seeing Abraham and his commitment and just packing up and leaving, I just don't know. I thought that was very interesting too. I had the same thoughts. I have no answers.
It sounded like you said when we read it, that they did know who the Lord was.
It sounded like they knew exactly who he was.
And it's, God tells you to marry within your own godly family.
Yes.
So other than the fact that their bloodlines are a little too close, they are marrying within a godly family.
Well, that was what she was saying. Terah at some point was, worshipped idols, so I don't know. But certainly for the genealogy, absolutely, and we'll see that too. So, how's that? I had the same thoughts. I have absolutely no answers. I do not know. Okay. So verse 15, back in Genesis 24:15, and it came about before he had finished speaking, they beheld Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, came out with the jar on her shoulder. And the girl was very beautiful, a virgin, and no man had had relations with her. And she went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up. So in light of what you were talking about, feeding the camels, I mean, whatever this is, they said it was not unusual at all. They have stairs that led down to the spring, and you would get your jar and then walk back up the stairs. But there's a going down and there's a coming up. So it's not like turn on the water faucet.
I mean, a gallon of water is 8 pounds.
Very good. I'm going to write these notes down because I had no idea. 8 pounds.
So that was a lot of water. 8 times 300.
Yes. And then tell me how much the camels would drink.
30 gallons.
Up to 30 gallons per camel. Okay, that's going to be very helpful when we get to this next part. So he sees this beautiful woman. He does not know her genealogy yet. He's hoping, but he doesn't know. So he's still got this pride on his lips and his heart, and she comes down and he sees her, and then he goes out to meet her. So verse 17, then the servant ran to meet her, and he said, please, and consistent with his humility, please let me drink a little water from your jar. So consistent with everything we've seen of him. And she said, drink, my lord. And she quickly lowered her jar to her hand and gave him a drink. Just quick, and I love how it's just quickly, and just very consistent with their culture. The conversation would have been very limited, just not a lot of words, not a lot of conversing. Now, when she had finished giving him a drink, she said, and this is volunteering, I will draw also for your camels. And here's the key, until they have finished drinking. And so you have 10 camels, and they can drink 30 gallons each. That's 300 gallons of water, and she can carry probably one at a time. And going down and coming up, going down and coming up. And so this could take a while.
It's 2,400 pounds of water.
Oh my goodness, that's good math. Oh wow. Okay. I mean, that's just so helpful when you read this text to think about those things. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and then ran back to the well to draw, and she drew for all his camels. So she's going to continue going down and coming up. I mean, and not complain. And so now this next verse, verse 21, meanwhile, the man was gazing at her in silence to know whether the Lord had made his journey successful or not. So, and he had a while to gaze and watch. Yes. And then you can see her attitude and just her, it was just going to be very insightful to watch her work and do this and just do it. And so, and I appreciate this too about the servant. He doesn't jump to a conclusion. It would have been so easy to say, it must be, she must be the one, and just jump to that conclusion. But he pauses, and that's just such wisdom, to pause and wait and make sure that this is the one that the Lord has set apart for this.
She lowered the jar so he could drink. Everybody's drinking out of the same jug.
Yes.
I mean, this is a stranger from some other land.
Yes.
And
yes, and she doesn't even hesitate.
Didn't even hesitate.
Mm-mm.
Very neighborly,
very hospitable. Yes, we're going to see her whole family just is. And so he, like I said, he has a long time to wait in silence. Like he's not trying to converse or find anything else out. He's just watching her attitude. And then, verse 22, then it came about when the camels had finished drinking. So, I mean, a long time could have passed for her to gather that much water, that the man took a gold ring weighing a half a shekel and 2 bracelets for her wrists weighing 10 shekels in gold, and said, so he had already taken the gifts out. Now, this is for the most part consistent with their customs until we get to this part, because you would have not shower the gifts until the wedding arrangements had been made, and then you get the gifts out. And so he gets them out, just shows his confident. He waited to make sure, and at this point he's very confident, but he still has no idea his family. He's just hoping. He's right, but
He's trusting God to be doing
exactly what he said he would do. Exactly. But not too hasty, where we do the wrong thing. But okay, so he took out the gold ring and gives her this, and then he said, "Whose daughter are you? Please tell me, is there room for us to lodge in your father's house?" And she said to him, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor." And again she said to him, "We have plenty of both straw and feed, and room to lodge in." Then the man bowed low and worshipped the Lord. So here we are in a very public place. You've got this young girl there, and he knew, but then just to hear the words and just to realize how God had just, it just gives me chills to think about how God had orchestrated this whole thing. He just drops right there publicly, just drops. And he said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his loving kindness and his truth toward my master. As for me, the Lord has guided me in the way to the house of my master's brother." When you see God at work, what else do? You can't help but just be overwhelmed with gratitude, humility, and you just want to explode when you see what he's done, and you just feel his just sincere, humble gratitude. When he heard her say Nahor, that had to just been a chills. Yeah. What else do you say? Just right then.
I wondered how heavy 150 grams were, because that's the weight of the bracelets.
This one how strong she had to be. She had just carried all those things, and now she's got all that jewelry.
I'm sure she didn't perspire.
No.
A nickel is like a gram.
A gram?
Well,
The weight of a nickel.
a little tube of bacitracin or ointment, that's 30 grams.
So how many
So
grams
4 of
is
those
this?
or 5 of those would
So
be
it's a nice
150.
solid gold.
A shekel's
Be like a
2.7
bracelet.
ounce, so the bracelets would have come out to be 4 ounces.
4 ounces. 4 ounces of gold. Wow.
And then the ring would have been less than half of it.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. So helpful. Okay. So he gives the gifts, and then he says, "Whose daughter are you?" Then she says it, and then he just drops right there, and he bows low and worships the Lord right then and right there. And
When you read this, you think it's a ring for her finger.
I know, but now we find out later it's for her nose.
I was kind of wondering how you knew, how did he know she was a maiden, a virgin, and had been with another man? But if they all go around wearing rings in their noses, then I guess you know.
They're taken. That is such a good
And it also shows how important family was, because when
Yes.
somebody asks who we belong to, we don't used to go through all of that.
I know, that's true. That is very interesting.
But she goes
Yeah.
back quite far.
Right, the only time we do that is at our family reunion. Say, what'd you say? Okay. Okay, so he's just bowed in prayer. Then verse 28. Then the girl ran and told her mother's household about it. Can you imagine? Of course she
in
would
good
run to her
shape.
mother.
She's in good
She's
shape.
amazing. She's amazing. And she runs back and tells her mom. So precious. Yes. Precious.
That old, she probably had some energy, but I can't imagine.
We don't know how old she is.
No, we don't.
I mean, it would be tiring
Only
to haul out
Sarah.
the water hose and fill a trough for the
I know.
honestly.
Right. And, yeah. I don't know what time of year this was, but it can get very warm. Toasty.
But they married those girls off very young.
They did.
So she can't have been really old, I would say.
I don't know. It's so interesting. We just don't know. Sarah's the only one. So, okay, now in verse 29. Now Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban, and we're going to see Laban later on in the book of Genesis. He's the father of Rachel and Leah. So we'll add that to our genealogy later. And Laban ran outside to the man at the spring. Okay, I read this, and this is so interesting about Hebrew literature and the way they write, is they would say the bottom line first. They start with the bottom line, and then they go back and fill in the details that led to that. And so that's a very good, and after I read that, I thought, that explains a lot of the scriptures that we read. So you have the big picture bottom line here, and then we're going to go back and look at details. And so we see that Laban ran outside to the man at the spring, and then verse 30, we're going to go back and look at details. And it came about that when he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's wrist, and when he heard the words of Rebekah his sister saying, "This is what the man said to me," he went to the man, and behold, he was standing by the camels at the spring. So it was when he saw.
He didn't immediately go and assume that he was going to be welcome. He waited for her to go and announce,
Yes.
"Mom, guess what? We're having company for dinner."
That's a very good point, yes. And then Laban sees the jewelry, and he's like, "What is up with this?" And
You
so
know, big brother,
he
her little
overhears.
brother.
Yes, and he overhears, and so
Isn't it interesting that she runs back to her mother's
it's.
household?
Yes, I love that. I just thought that was so sweet.
Well, I think
That's
that
just so
shows the
normal.
closeness of mothers and
Yes.
children.
Yes, it's just so normal, and just yes, just to run back and tell your mom. And you're right, the closeness and just wanting to share this with someone who will appreciate it. And so, and then verse 31. So now Laban is visiting with the servant, and he said, "Come in, blessed of the Lord." I love the starting the first words out of his mouth. "Why do you stand outside, since I prepared the house and a place for the camels?" So the man entered the house. Then Laban unloaded the camels, and he gave straw and feed to the camels, and water to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. And when I read, I thought this was fascinating too. It was customary in that day to take care of the animals first. Always take care of the animals first, and then the riders. So I thought that was interesting. So anyway, he's consistent with that. Then he washed the feet of the men who were with him.
That's because if you take care of your business, and your business takes care of you.
Very perfect. Yes. Good. Okay, verse 33. But when food was set before him to eat, he said, "I will not eat until I have told my business." And he said, "Speak on." So he said, "I am Abraham's servant. And the Lord has greatly blessed my master, so that he has become rich, and he has given him flocks and herds and silver and gold and servants and maids and camels and donkeys." And I just love how everything in this passage, everything recognizes God's goodness. Everything is a result of his goodness and his blessing. It's never attributed to any human anything. Business smarts, anything human. It's always the Lord, the Lord, the Lord. Yeah.
I mean, Abraham also, his reputation has probably preceded him.
Yes.
I mean, Sodom and Gomorrah has occurred.
Yeah. Yes.
A few other,
Right. We have a couple of
things have
men,
happened.
right, who tried to take Sarah. That
Right,
would have
and
left
so,
an impression.
and he's family.
Yes.
Because they just say, Abraham. I don't know how common Abraham was for a name. I know Abram was, but Abraham may not have been.
Well, that's what I thought was interesting, too, when he says Abraham. Evidently, they'd heard of it. But we saw in the end of 22, after the whole sacrifice of Isaac, that it goes through, and Abraham got word that his brother had all these sons. So, there was some communication, just not like we have it today. But, yeah, I wondered about the name change. I thought they knew who he meant when he said Abraham, even though he was Abram when he left him. But they knew who he was talking about. So
they know he is a great man and that he is somebody of standing
and that God changed his name.
And that you probably don't want to be on his bad side.
Yes.
Well, he changed both their names.
Yes, he did. He did. And so I thought that was interesting that they, knew who it was. then in verse 35, and the Lord has greatly blessed my master, so that he has become rich. He, as in God himself, has given him flocks and herds and silver and gold and servants and maids and camels and donkeys. And I just couldn't help but think the servant relays it that way because that's the way Abraham sees it. I mean, that's just the way it was. Verse 36, now Sarah, my master's wife, bore a son to my master in her old age, and he has given him all that he has. So this would have been common in arranging marriages. Right up front, you let them know your financial status. And so he says right up front, I mean, if you're a dad and you've got a little girl, you think, oh, can you take care of my daughter? Just the way that it is. And so he lays out first thing, that Abraham's been greatly blessed and that Isaac's an only heir and the heir to everything. He lays it out right up front.
But he's a catch.
Yes. And of course, the gifts would have also been an indication. And then verse 37, and my master made me swear, saying, you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanite in whose land I live, but you shall go to my father's house, to my relatives, and take a wife for my son. I mean, he relays the whole scenario word for word, which I always think that is so interesting, the things that I know that everything is by design, and if God has put it here and he's put it here twice, it was on purpose. And if he leaves out details of the traveling, it's on purpose. If he leaves out the sermons, everything is by design. So very interesting that he repeats everything here. It's by design, but I don't know. I don't know the reason why. I just know it must be very important. And so we'll read it again. Verse 39, and I said to my master, suppose the woman doesn't follow me. And he said to me, the Lord before whom I have walked, he will send his angel with you and make your journey successful. And you will take a wife for my son, from my relatives, and from my father's house. Then you will be free from my oath when you come to my relatives. And if they do not give her to you, you will be free from my oath. So I came today to the spring, and said, and he even tells what he prayed. O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, if thou wilt make my journey on which I go successful, behold, I am standing by the spring, and may it be that the maiden who comes out to draw, and to whom I say, please let me drink a little water from your jar, and she will say to me, you drink, and I will draw for your camels also. Let her be the woman whom the Lord has appointed for my master's son. So he's very clear. He won't even eat until he gets this out. So he's very clear about everything.
This commentary says that this is the longest speech by a servant or a slave in the Old Testament.
What an interesting, that's very interesting. It's true. That is so interesting. And he gives every detail. And he just wants Laban and Bethuel to know where this is coming from. And then he goes on to say in 45, before I had finished speaking in my heart, behold, Rebekah came out with her jar on her shoulder and went down to the spring and drew. And I said to her, please let me drink. And she quickly lowered her jar from her shoulder and said, drink, and I will water your camels also. So I drank, and she watered the camels also. Then I asked her and said, whose daughter are you? And she said, the daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Milcah bore to him. And I put the ring on her nose and the bracelets on her wrist. And I bowed low and worshipped the Lord and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had guided me in the right way to take the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son. So now, if you are going to deal kindly and truly with my master, tell me, and if not, let me know, that I may turn to the right or the left. So he says right up front, and I love this. So verse 49, so now if you are going to deal kindly and truly with my master. And again, he never says with me, you're going to deal kindly with me. It's not, he's just so like the invisible servant here. If you're going to deal kindly and truly with my master, tell me. If not, let me know that I may turn to the right or the left, to the right hand or the left. And what he's saying is, I mean, it's just a Hebrew idiom, I guess, and that's how it translated. But he's just saying, then I'll know. Do I go home with her? Then I'll just know what to do. So just turn to the right or the left would have been an idiom. Just saying, then I'll know what to do next. Verse 50, then Laban and Bethuel answered him. And this was very true to the custom of that day, that the father and the brother would have a say in this. There was a brother, they would both say, and so they both answered and said, the matter comes from the Lord, so we cannot speak to you bad or good. And this was another Hebrew idiom. I thought this one was so interesting. He says, I cannot speak to you bad or good. So what they're doing is they're covering the whole spectrum, from one extreme to the other. Extreme, good, extreme, just covering the whole spectrum and saying, what more can we say? God's already spoken. There's nothing in all this spectrum for us to say when God has already spoken. God has already said He's arranged this. And it's okay. So I'll read that again. Then Laban and Bethuel answered and said, the matter comes from the Lord, so we cannot speak to you bad or good. There's nothing left for us to say. It sounds like God has already spoken. And then verse 51, behold, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go, and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has spoken. I mean, how could you hear that testimony and ever doubt that? I mean, how do you speak against that when the testimony is just so good? And it's just such an amazing story. That he knew the right girl to whom he should speak, and it's just amazing. And in verse 50, and when it came about, when Abraham, what is that what it was? Okay, 52. And it came about when Abraham's servant heard their words that he bowed himself to the ground before the Lord, as seems to be his custom. Just the humility and just constantly, that's that grateful heart we talk about. It's just that heart of gratitude and just recognizing God's blessings and being so grateful. It truly brings about humility. I mean, it brings about true humility when you just recognize all that God has done. It's very humbling. And so he just demonstrates that for us. And then verse 53, and the servant brought out articles of silver and articles of gold and garments, and he gave them to Rebekah. He also gave precious things to her brother and to her mother. And in one of the commentaries I read, it said the fact that he said and precious things, he's probably not talking about spices. So these are probably very nice gifts. Very, very precious, rare, nice gifts. And then which this is when you bring out the gifts. After the wedding's been arranged, then you bring out more. So
it's almost like he's presenting her with a dowry.
Yeah, I know, yes. And I did read something on that the dowry really didn't come about until much later.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. Yeah. So, yes, you're right, just showering her mother, showering her brother.
But not the dad.
But not the dad. The dad's never mentioned. Isn't that interesting? I know. Verse 54, then he and the men who were with him ate and drank and spent the night. When they arose in the morning, he said, send me away to my master. But her brother and her mother said, let the girl stay with us a few days, say 10. Afterwards she may go. And he said to them, do not delay me, since the Lord has prospered my way. Send me away that I may go to my master. You know, he was just so ready to report this to Abraham. And
relieved.
Yeah, relieved, yes. And ready to rejoice with Abraham. And someone else suggested that maybe prolonging it, Rebecca might have changed her mind. But I don't know.
Well, he still has, another 21 days
I
to
know.
travel back.
Yes, I know. It's going to be a long trip, and he is ready to get home. And they said, we will call the girl and consult her wishes, which that is so out of the ordinary. Like, that would have never. So I'm not sure what that means. Then they called Rebekah and said to her, "Will you go with this man?" And she said, "I will go." So, there we have it. Verse 59, thus they sent away their sister Rebekah with her nurse, with Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, "May you, our sister, become thousands of 10,000s, and may your descendants possess the gate of those who hate them." I mean, that's just like a great prophetic statement. I don't think they had any idea how true those words. I don't think they knew how true those words were going to be.
This commentary identified the nurse as Deborah. Is this the same Deborah that we meet later on?
Yeah. Oh, my commentary says so too. But she's
Really?
what we meet later.
Okay. Well, good. Yeah. Okay. We'll see her later. Log that away.
The nurse is Deborah? Is that what you said?
Uh-huh.
Does it say where we meet her? What verse?
Deborah, 35:8.
Okay. So Genesis 35:8.
I guess it's Genesis. Deborah, the one who had nourished and raised Rebekah, died and was buried under the oak of Bethel. So Jacob named it the Oak of Weeping.
Oh, wow.
So she must have been very special.
Yeah, Genesis 35:8. The Oak of Weeping. Okay. That is so interesting. I mean, I find it so fascinating, the names that are mentioned and the names that aren't in Scripture. And so for Deborah to get her name, that's huge. Yeah, it's just so interesting. It's just so interesting. Okay. And then verse 61, then Rebekah arose with her maids, and they mounted the camels and followed the man. So the servant took Rebekah and departed. Now Isaac had come from going to Beer Lahai Roi, for he was living in the Negev. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field. And I did look at that word, and it gave more the idea of lamenting or a prayer, which understanding that this servant is on this trip, has made this trip and is seeking out his wife, that how appropriate that he would go out and pray. So Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening, and he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, camels were coming. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel, which from what I read would be part of that custom. When you saw a man coming, you would dismount. And she said to the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field to meet us?" And the servant said, "He is my master." Then she took her veil and covered herself. And from what I understood, this veil would have been not just a head veil, a body veil would have covered herself, her everything. And then verse 66, and the servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. So they didn't record it a third time, but I know he relayed every detail, and with such enthusiasm and gratitude. Then Isaac brought her into his mother Sarah's tent, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. Thus Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. So he took her to his mother's tent.
The veil, when I think of veil, I think it's something sheer. But was this more like the burgas?
See, I think the burgers are more part of, I'll have to look into it, but more part of that culture still, the Middle Eastern life.
So it would be something heavier.
Heavier, and to cover. But I don't know, I'll have to look into that, but I thought I understood it was a heavier covering.
That's what I thought too.
The word for veils, the only definition is wrapper.
Yeah, I know that's
A wrapper?
Yes, and
Okay.
it would have wrapped her,
Yeah.
which maybe that's why I thought thicker, but yeah, it would have
Okay.
covered her everything. Oh, why can't I?
Sorry, Abby just called. She's sick.
Oh no. Which that would have been consistent with modesty in that time, and then he takes her to Sarah's tent, which is very interesting, you know.
Yeah, I was wondering about
Such a
that.
great-
That immediately identified her as the matriarch of the clan.
Exactly. Very good. Yes. Yes. And I mean, it just showed such great that he would do that insight, or that he would take her to that tent, and it was meant as an honor. It was a. And he took Rebecca, she became his wife, and he loved her. And I think this is the first time love is used in a marriage relationship, which is very interesting under the circumstances that this is the first time we see it. He loved her, and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death.
You have any commentary on that? Because we're talking 30 years.
I know. That's why I wanted you to see how long it was. I know. But he and his mother were close. And he and his mother would have been so close. And of course, there's no, Sarah's gone. There's just no matronly. And so that would have been, I don't know.
So it doesn't say that Abraham loved Sarah. I thought
It might have.
because I had to.
He did love her. I just don't know if it actually used those
Whether it
terms.
stated that or
Right.
not.
But he did love her dearly, and we
Right.
saw that at her death, that he greatly loved her.
Okay, so I have a question.
Yeah, please.
So the servant and Rebecca were on their way back, and then Isaac just appears out of nowhere.
We'd gone to the field to pray. I know. I mean, I wondered if he didn't sense that they've been gone long enough, that maybe it's time.
It's time to.
Yeah.
It could have been a nightly ritual, though,
It
too.
could have been
the
it.
whole time.
I think he was surprised to see them coming. He was expecting them, but he wasn't sure when it would be.
Yeah. And yes. So I don't know.
I'm assuming they were married by proxy, and that's why she got the wedding ring in her nose. So they were married when they got there.
Well, I mean, we know by the time we get to the New Testament, if you're engaged, that's legally binding. Like, it was legal. You had to go through a legal divorce to call off an engagement, even if the marriage hadn't been.
Well, it didn't sound like there was.
I know.
Ceremony.
It's just so interesting, the details we get and the details we don't. It was legally binding, and he married her, and he loved her. We know that. Showered her with gifts and moved her into his mother's tent. So, any other thoughts or questions?
Did she ever get to see her mother again? I don't remember.
I don't know.
That always worries me.
Yes. I know when they were begging for 10 more days.
Yeah, I can understand from that mother's point of view.
Yes, you
It's just
can.
different back then because they spread out. They had to spread out.
Well, the daughters did. The sons always stayed close because they inherited that land, but the daughters went away.
Well, they just immediately gave her to him.
I know. It happened so
It's like
quickly.
she didn't have a choice then, but then she had to choose about whether she wanted to stay.
Uh-huh.